Alright guys, moving on. We're on chapter 15 now in Genesis, in our Bible series. Right, we're going to finish chapter 15 in this video. So follow along if you have a Bible. Start reading it with me. Otherwise you can just listen, I'll say the verses anyway. No worries. Just do a quick prayer before we start. God, I pray that you sanctify us by your truth, and your truth only. Your word is truth. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Chapter 15, right? This is the Lord's covenant with Abram. Verse 1. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. So this comes right after the war, right, that we just had in chapter 14. Right, Abram had just defeated the kings, right, and it would be natural, right, for him to fear revenge. Right, so what does God do? He comforts him. Right, God says, I am your shield. Right, and he also says, I am your shield and I am your very great reward. Right, and that's a very powerful truth. Right, the best reward for obeying God is not stuff, right? It's not tangible assets, right? The best reward for obeying God is God, right? Fellowship with him, knowing him and walking with him in his light, right? That's the best reward for obeying God, not assets, right? Not stuff, because that stuff goes away, right? Your fellowship with God, knowing God, lasts an eternity. Verse 2. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? So Abram brings up the issue he still has, right? That's been hanging over his life, right? Remember in the previous chapters, his wife can't give birth. And God promised descendants of Abram, right? But Abram is still childless and time is passing, so he's getting a bit worried. Verse 3. And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Right? So Abram is not denying God's purpose here, right? But he's trying to figure out the fulfillment, right? He's thinking, maybe this is how it happens, right? Through adoption. And this is often what people do, right? They believe God, but then they rush in with their own plan, right? And they sit in there waiting for God's plan, and the waiting gets uncomfortable, right? So they rush into their own plan. Verse 4. When the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. So God corrects Abraham, right? And he's clear and direct, right? Not adoption, not a servant. He will give him a biological son. God gives Abram more detail, but still God doesn't give him a timeline, right? A time. So Abram must keep walking by faith as he's done so far. 5. He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. So now God uses a visual lesson, right? Stars you can't count. You can't count stars, right? And that's the point. God is saying there's too many to number, right? He's saying Abram's descendants will be beyond counting the stars. 6. Abram believed to the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness, right? This is foundational. Abram is made right with God by his faith, right? Not by altars or by bravery or by good deeds. Those things matter, yep, but they flow from the faith that you have in God. So Abram is declared righteous because he believed God. 7. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. So God's reminding Abram here, right? I brought you here. Abram traveled, right? He did the traveling, but God guided Abram, right? So almost God was like the GPS for Abram. He couldn't have got there without knowing the directions, right? God is the one directing the story. Verse 8. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So Abram's looking for assurance, right? He wants confirmation, right? We know that God is gracious, right? And instead of rebuking Abram, God gives him a sign. Verse 9. So the Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. 10. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. So God tells Abram to bring specific animals, right? Abram cuts them in half and arranges them into pieces. Birds of prey come down, but Abram drives them away, right? This sounds strange to us, but Abram knew exactly what it meant, right? This is covenant language, right? God is preparing to formalize a promise. Verse 12. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. So God puts Abram into a deep sleep, right? God is about to speak with weight and with clarity, right? And it serves us as a reminder, right? You don't hear God well when you're constantly crowded by noise and distraction. So what God does is he slows Abram down by putting him into this deep sleep, right? And often I see this with myself, right? Often we're crowded by noise, destruction, things going on, family, friends, whatever it may be, work. Sometimes you just have to slow down, right? Because God speaks to you with weight and clarity, and you don't hear God well when you're crowded with all this stuff, right? With all this nonsense. So God slows Abram down. Verse 13. Then the Lord said to Abram, I'm reading the wrong thing. 13. Then the Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated here. 14. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. So God tells Abram, right, that his descendants will be strangers in a foreign land and enslaved for 400 years. That points forward to Israel's time in Egypt. But God also says he will judge that nation, right? And Abram's descendants will come out with great possessions, he said. So God is showing Abram the future, right? Both the suffering and deliverance. 15. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. So Abram won't live to see the slavery, right? He will die in peace. And for a believer, right, death is not a punishment, right? It's entrance into God's presence, into the kingdom. Verse 16. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. So God explains the delay, right? Why wait 400 years, right? Because God's patient. The people in the land they're wicked, right? But God gives time. God does not rush into judgment. He doesn't rush judgment. Verse 17. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. Right, this is the key moment. Normally both parties walk through pieces, right? But here God alone passes through, meaning this is a unilateral covenant, right? God is saying, I alone guarantee this promise, right? It does not rest on Abram's strength. It rests on my faithfulness. 18. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, 21. Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. So God then defines the land boundaries and lists the people that are currently living there, right? The covenant is God's commitment. And Abram's role is to believe, to trust, and to follow, right? God's role is to fulfill every word that he promised. All right, that's chapter 15. We're going to wrap it up there. We're going to do 16 in the next video. Thank you guys if you've watched this far. It means a lot. Appreciate you guys. I want to pray that God blesses you all. Hope you have the good rest of your day, week, weekend. All right, and see you guys in the next video.